TalkSport pundit and ex-Tottenham Hotspur midfielder Danny Murphy recently said that Spurs only made it to the Champions League final because they had an easy route, which, to say the least, a lot of Spurs fans were not happy about. So I thought I'd take a deep dive into that incredible, majestic journey to Madrid back in 2019, and along the way, pick out 10 things you didn't know, or perhaps more realistically, like Danny Murphy may not have remembered, about Tottenham's incredible run to European football's showcase event, the Champions League final. Number 10. Tottenham booked their place in the 2018-2019 Champions League by virtue of their third place finish in the 17-18 Premier League table. They finished behind Pep Guardiola's sports-washed, financially doped Manchester City, who took the title racking up 100 points. Second to them was Jose Mourinho's billion-pound Manchester United squad, who bored the fans to tears with their functional negative football taking them to 81 points. Third place was an excellent performance from Pochettino's Spurs, given they had to play all of their games at soulless corporate Wembley Stadium, and that their transfer budget, affected by building the new stadium, was nowhere near that of the teams who finished below them in Liverpool, Chelsea and Arsenal. Number 9. Despite Chairman Daniel Levy claiming that the building of the new ground wouldn't endanger Tottenham's transfer dealings, in the summer of 2018, Spurs became the first Premier League club in history not to buy a single player during the transfer window. And that at a time where Spurs fans and manager Mauricio Pochettino felt that the club were only 2 world-class signings away from seriously challenging for the title. However, I do think there's an argument to say that if Daniel Levy had come out and said that Tottenham had no money whatsoever, then state-run Manchester City and cheating Chelsea would have been the vultures sniffing around Tottenham's best talent in 2 generations, something that might have been difficult to ignore with a billion-pound stadium to build. Number 8. As I mentioned at the top, Danny Murphy's recollection of Tottenham's route to the final was that of them having an easy run. However, this argument can be cut off right from the start, with the Champions League draw seeing Spurs drawn in a group of death against former champions Barcelona and Inter Milan, as well as Dutch powerhouses PSV Eindhoven, who won the European Cup back in 1988, which, to anyone over the age of 25 who doesn't live their lives on their PlayStation, is actually the same competition. Spurs were at best third favourites to get out of that group based on the European coefficient seedings, and considering they hadn't spent any money on new players, the likelihood of them putting together a challenge to win the big-eared trophy looked bleak at best. Number 7. After just 3 games of the group stage, Tottenham looked dead and buried. They threw away certain victory in their opening game against Inter at the San Siro. They'd led all the way to the 85th minute thanks to Christian Eriksen's deflected strike. But Spurs wilted under pressure, and 2 goals in the final 5 minutes from Mauro Icardi and Matthias Vecino saw the San Siro faithful go crazy, and Tottenham having to travel back to London pointless. Next up was an absolute schooling from Lionel Messi and Barcelona at Wembley. Spurs had actually beaten recent double Champions League winners Real Madrid at Wembley the season before, so hopes were high. But with creative outlets Christian Eriksen and Dele Alli missing, Tottenham were traumatised by a 4-2 home defeat, led by Messi with a brace and a virtuoso volley from Ivan Rakitic. The third game in the group saw Spurs once again leading into the final stages, this time away at PSV. But a Hugo Lloris red card and late Luke de Jong strike saw Spurs on just 1 point after 3 Champions League group games. A dire situation that no previous European side had ever got through to the knockouts from. Number 6. A return fixture against PSV at Wembley saw the first signs that Pochettino's Tottenham hadn't flatlined yet in their quest to get through to the Champions League knockout stages. Despite going behind early, an unlikely hero began to emerge in the shape of Spanish target man Fernando Llorente, who came off the bench to play a role in both Harry Kane goals that saw Spurs win the 3 points. Next up was a chance of revenge against Inter at Wembley, and Christian Eriksen once again came up with a goal against his future employees. This meant that Tottenham got to go to the Nou Camp to face Barcelona in their final group game with their destiny in their own hands. Well, when I say in their own hands, what I mean is Tottenham had to match whatever result PSV Eindhoven got at the San Siro against Inter Milan, so realistically, they'd probably need to win. However, surprisingly, PSV did Spurs a solid by getting a draw at Inter. And with just a couple of minutes to go at the Nou Camp, Spurs needed to try and find an equaliser against Barcelona. Not for the final time in this topsy-turvy journey, Brazilian dribble merchant Lucas Moura popped up with the vital goal, sending Spurs fans and players into raptures and securing their route to the knockout stages. Number 5. Lucien Favre's Dortmund came to Wembley in the Champions League last 16, a huge threat to Tottenham's chances of making it through to the quarter-finals. Tottenham's injury woes meant an unlikely lineup for the first leg at Wembley, with a three-at-the-back system seeing Juan Foyth play alongside Davison Sanchez and Toby Alderweireld. But it was Heung-min Son who came to the fore. Sonny was known as the beekeeper in Germany because of his prolific scoring form against Dortmund whilst he played for Leverkusen. He opened the scoring in a 3-0 win at Wembley, with Fernando Llorente and Super Jan Vertonghen, who also assisted Son's goal and arguably played his best ever game in a Spurs shirt, scoring the others. With a 3-goal lead and no away goals conceded, Tottenham only needed to keep Dortmund out at the Westfalenstadion to progress. But they did more than that, with a classic Harry Kane finish, completing a 4-0 aggregate rout and sending Spurs to the quarter-finals. Number 4. Tottenham's first ever game in their brand spanking new 61,000-seater stadium was against Premier League champions Manchester City in the Champions League quarter-finals. The atmosphere was unlike anything I'd ever heard at a football game, and I know because I was there. The first leg itself was a bit stodgy, with Pep Guardiola, as ever, overthinking things in the Champions League with his rotation, and Harry Kane limping off yet again with another ankle injury. It was left to the scourge of Manchester City, Heung-min Son, to score the only goal of the game, with a solo effort taking Tottenham to the Etihad with a slim 1-goal lead. The return leg was one of the greatest games in Tottenham Hotspur's modern history. 5 goals in the first 21 minutes left the tie 3-3 on aggregate, with Spurs having the advantage on away goals after a brace from Son. With an hour to go, Sergio Aguero then put Manchester City ahead, before super sub Fernando Llorente scored with a header handball combo with just 20 minutes left on the clock. VAR allowed it to stand, meaning that Spurs were going through all the way up to the 95th minute. But the Lily-White fans' hearts seemed to shatter with the last kick of the game, as Raheem Sterling slotted past Hugo Lloris to send the citizens through to the semi-finals. Or at least we thought, because VAR had other ideas, spotting Aguero offside earlier in the move. That decision sent Spurs through to their first ever Champions League semi-final, and Tottenham fans genuinely started to believe that their trophy drought could end with the biggest one of all. Number 3. The semi-final. Erik ten Hag's Ajax, back when he was a good manager, came to North London and dominated Tottenham. It really was one-way traffic, and Spurs could actually count themselves lucky to only lose 1-0. A young Donny van der Beek, back when he was a good player, scored the only goal. The second leg was something that hadn't been seen in Champions League history. Well, not since the previous night, when Liverpool produced the mother of all comebacks to go through to the final against Barcelona. Early goals from Matthias de Ligt and Hakim Ziyech put Ajax 3-0 up on aggregate, and yet again Spurs looked pretty much dead and buried. But the second half saw an extraordinary turnaround, single-handedly led from Brazilian Lucas Moura's hat-trick, with the third goal flying past keeper Andre Onana with the very last kick of the game. Cue Bedlam. Harry Kane forgot that he was injured and ran down to celebrate from the stands. Pochettino began crying on the pitch, and the Spurs fans and players just had no idea what to do with themselves. Into the Champions League final. Bloody hell. Number 2. Despite Tottenham's unbelievable run to the Champions League final, their form had been poor domestically in the months leading up to it. They lost 7 of their final 12 league games, including defeats to Southampton, Bournemouth, West Ham and Burnley. During the Burnley loss, manager Maurizio Pochettino lost his head and went onto the pitch to abuse referee Mike Dean. Some would say correctly, as let's face it, Mike Dean was unbearable. The wheels were starting to come off for Pochettino's Spurs side. In the run-up to the Champions League final, Spurs seemed to be treating it like they'd already reached their maximum level of achievement. Pochettino began saying in interviews that he might have to leave Tottenham if they won the trophy. and the club lobbied UEFA to let the entire squad have a photograph on the pitch in Madrid before the final. Almost as if none of them would get a chance to play in such a big game again. It just smacked to me a little bit of being happy to be there, rather than the grizzled ruthlessness that winners require to take home the biggest trophy in club football. And at number 1 in the 10 things you didn't know, or more realistically might not have remembered about Tottenham's Champions League final run, 22 seconds. That is the amount of time that I enjoyed that night in Madrid. I was there, sat amongst a majority of Liverpool fans in the general admission seats at the final. And after just 22 seconds, a Sadio Mane cross hit Moussa Sissoko's armpit. Yes, armpit. A penalty was given when it absolutely shouldn't have been. If only there was VAR. Oh, but there was. They didn't even look at it. Nothing. Nada. Spurs had been on a thrilling journey that season, but it was all over after 22 seconds. Perhaps realistically, it was all over before the game had even started. Spurs never seemed to actually believe that they could win it. They had a central midfield of Harry Winks and Moussa Sissoko. Is that a midfield that could ever lift the Champions League? Surely not. After Mo Salah dispatched the penalty past Hugo Lloris, Tottenham huffed and puffed. But they never really made themselves a chance. Harry Kane started ahead of Lucas Moura, but was clearly unfit. And then, ignominy to end all ignominies. We allowed Divock Origi to score the second goal that ends the tie and wins the trophy for Liverpool. Did the loss hurt like hell? Of course. But was it worth it to go through that 8 months where we got so close to the promised land? Absolutely. They were the 10 things you didn't know, or perhaps more realistically hadn't remembered about Tottenham's run to the 2019 Champions League final. I think Danny Murphy is absolutely wrong suggesting that Spurs had an easy route there. He's completely off his rocker, or maybe it's just that he works for TalkSport and he has to say bonkers stuff. That whole journey for me as a Spurs fan was just incredible. I went all around Europe following them. I went to a Champions League final. Sure, it didn't work out how I wanted it to, but it was so close. I could feel it. And of course, there's always the thought, could we have done better had that penalty not been given? But thank you guys for watching. I really appreciate it. Please do press that subscribe button if you're not already subscribed to the channel. I do daily Tottenham Hotspur content. And also, please do press the like if you haven't already. Most importantly, come on you Spurs.